What I want to talk about next is the Paranthropus Wars. Now, Paranthropus was a subspecies of proto-human that did not survive beyond the time period of around 600,000 BC. So, the species was a grazing ape that traveled around Africa and uh, populated the world in large herds that were sometimes ranging in 500 or more individuals. So the idea of this species is that it sort of resembled the baboon species now, not in physical form, but in lifestyle. So the the Paranthropus was something that would probably have dominant males and have a harem to each of these dominant males, and then lived in a large group where they would use that group for protection. Now, it's important to also note that um, they lived like baboons, similar to their lifestyle, but they were much larger than baboons, and they had the ability to throw large rocks. There's not a lot of evidence that they used tools, but they would have probably used sticks as clubs or bones as clubs. Again, throwing rocks was something that they could do very easily, and because they walked upright, they had a very strong ability to see enemies before they came near them. So they were an intimidating species, to say the least. And one attribute that the skull of the Paranthropus has that you don't see in Homo erectus, Homo habilis, or the earlier Australopithecines is this sagittal crest, which goes up above the head. It's just this long bone that protrudes out of the skull. And what this indicates is that it had a strong bite force on the jaw. It was built to chew things, and this is speculated by most scientists that work in the field, is that they had this because they were grazing on grass. And because they had this, it meant that they had a very powerful bite. And so you wouldn't want to get in a fight with these things because they could bite so hard. The bite force was probably similar to that of a chimpanzee or even a gorilla. And if you look at a gorilla, you'll see that they also have a extremely pronounced sagittal crest, and this is the kind of sagittal crest that the Paranthropus had. Now, the Paranthropus was something that traveled in large herds and was using those large herds for protection against predators and other proto-humans that were living at the time. And one of the humans that it would come in contact with next was the Homo erectus. And the Homo erectus was one of the most advanced apes that had come from this time period. And what made this creature so advanced was the fact that it could use tools. And it was much larger in stature than any of the previous ones. So what this thing could do is see things ahead of time, and it traveled in smaller groups, mostly family-sized, sort of tribes, and would take out animals. It was a predatory species, so the idea of these two clashing together is something that I've always had interest in. Now, the two of them being so different, for the for the majority of the time, the Homo erectus avoided the Paranthropus because there were not so many of them. There were not as many Homo erectus on the planet as there were Paranthropus. And this was something that led to the success of the Paranthropus because it had free roam of the planet. It could go pretty much anywhere, and it would travel the grazing fields. So the Great Plains of Africa, where the grazing animals are, that's where the Paranthropus, that was where its home was. And it would travel around and basically eat a certain area and then move on. And it would sort of go in these different seasonal movements across Africa. It's also important to realize that Africa was most likely a much more forested area than it is now. It's not, when we're talking about Africa 2 million years ago, we shouldn't be envisioning the Africa of today where there's just desert. There's so much desert in Africa, right? And there's certain time periods where the whole continent sort of just dries up, and places that once had huge fields would just become desolate areas. This was not the way that it worked back then. A lot of the time, even though there were dry periods, they were not as harsh as they are in modern times. And so the Paranthropus was allowed to thrive on the grass and the greenery of the landscape. The struggle between the Paranthropus and the Homo erectus was something that started in a small way, where essentially the conflicts were mostly to do with territorial fights between the two, and mostly resulted in the Homo erectus leaving the area that the Paranthropus moved into. And they basically would sort of chase each other around. The erectus would live in areas where the Paranthropus had moved on from, and then when it moved back into the area, the Homo erectus would have to find a new location to live. And so there was this ebb and flow of the two of them, where they were not staying in contact with each other very much. They didn't have a lot of conflict because the two would just avoid each other as often as they could. But it started to become more and more that the Homo erectus was gaining an upper hand on the Paranthropus, where every time that it had found and created a new tool, it would start using those tools on the Paranthropuses. And the first one is an early spear. Using sharp sticks to jab at things was a major advantage that the Homo erectus had. Also, being able to build the hand axe, which is the main tool of the Homo erectus, which was just a rock. It was basically what they would do is take a rock and sharpen it on one edge until it would fit in the hand, and it could use this rock for smashing nuts, chopping wood, sharpening wood to make like a spear, and using it to break bones to get the bone marrow out. Things like this is what it would use it for. And as they developed these primitive technologies, the Paranthropus was really just using sticks and rocks to club things, and mostly it relied on its ability to bite. And the ability to have a spear on the Homo erectus side of things was a major advantage to keep yourself from getting bit by one of these Paranthropuses. the Paranthropus was a species that was much more like a brawling, it wanted to get close and grab hold of something and attack it using its mouth, rather than something that wanted to use a tool to get at something. Now, the Homo erectus was something that would much prefer to use a tool like a spear or a sharp rock than to actually go in for a bite against these Paranthropus. And because of this, the Paranthropus was driven steadily to extinction as the Homo erectus developed more and more technologies. And the final blow to the Paranthropus species was that the Homo erectus had developed fire. And once the fire was created, it could use this fire to burn whole fields that the Paranthropus lived on, the grass of that field. Because it was a grazing ape, the fire was the ultimate weapon against the Paranthropus. And also, the fact that Homo erectus had the fire and used it in conflict was also something that drove the Paranthropus out of its main niche and into extinction, because it could not contend with the technological leaps of the Homo erectus. And the Homo erectus later would go on to leave Africa, move into Asia and Europe, and lead to the modern humans and the modern human contemporaries that came next. So, I hope you found the Paranthropus Wars an interesting subject. I want to talk a lot more about this. It's something that I've always had a fascination with. So, thank you.